But let's get started with the Supreme Court striking down Biden's student loan forgiveness, which is fucking awful.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Nate Burleson. Breaking news out of the Supreme Court. The court just ruled that the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness plan is unconstitutional. The White House estimates the plan would have affected 37 million Americans.
For the record, there was no standing and no genuine harm established in this situation. And in another situation involving the gay graphic design story. And yet both of these rulings were completely partisan, were completely ridiculous, and also, I would even say, unconstitutional. But it doesn't matter because that's the Supreme Court, baby. They get to decide on whatever the fuck they want to, however they want to, and you can't do a fucking thing about it. 120 million people will be impacted by this decision because they decided to do so. Well, guess what? Doesn't matter. Sucks to suck.
And was set to forgive up to $20,000 in federal loans per qualifying borrower. The plan has been on hold since 6 Republican-led states who claimed the program violated President Biden's executive power took the administration to court. But the Biden administration argued the plan is permitted within the law and cited the HEROES Act, which allows the Secretary of Education to make changes related to student loans during national emergencies like the COVID pandemic. Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett is outside the Supreme Court. Chief, good morning.
Good morning, Nate, and welcome to the Supreme Court Plaza. As you said, in a 6-3 decision from the Supreme Court, writing on behalf of that majority, Chief Justice John Roberts addresses that question you raised right at the top, Nate. Did the HEROES Act, passed by Congress in 2003, give the Biden administration's Education Department the right to modify or amend that act to provide this student loan forgiveness? The court, through a 6-3 majority, says absolutely not. Let me read the main paragraph from the decision.
Let me just explain something to you guys. Okay, one thing that's like exceptional about this, it was expected, it was awful, but you know, such is the nature of the United States Supreme Court. Okay, but what is particularly frustrating to me, at least, as someone who is a politics watcher, politics enjoyer, Brett Kavanaugh, he has a lot of experience with debt relief. Okay, as a matter of fact, when he was running or when he was slated to be appointed to the United States Supreme Court, obviously you do a background check, and in that background check, certain things popped up. Brett Kavanaugh had a tremendous, mountainous amount of debt that may or may not be related to his gambling addiction, his sports book. And that debt was wiped out suspiciously. Very odd. Very odd. And we also completely stopped talking about that. It kind of got lost in the sauce with the other stuff, the Me Too stuff that he was involved in. And for some reason, nobody really mentioned that. I think it's a good time to bring that back in the especially coming on the heels of this ridiculous, absolutely unimaginably cruel decision that the Supreme Court made that basically favored a couple corporations who claimed that they could be potentially harmed financially by this decision and put their interest, their financial interest, over the interest of 120 million Americans. Okay? So yeah, I said somebody should ask how Brett Kavanaugh had his gambling debt forgiven. Debt disappeared or the debt was transferred to somewhere under the table. We don't know. We don't know what happened. You know, that's the situation. 43 million Americans who were promised relief by an elected president just got screwed over by an unelected group of justices, half of whom were appointed by a president who lost a popular vote and benefited from a stolen seat. Yep, it's totally fine. Nothing to see here, says Mehdi Hassan. Very wild. Very, very wild decision. Justice Alito accepted tens of thousands of dollars in lavish vacation gifts from a billionaire who lobbied to cancel student loan forgiveness. After the gifts, Alito voted to overturn. This SCOTUS's corruption undercuts its legitimacy by putting its rulings up for sale. New York Times useful life hack on how to escape student debt. All right, we'll get to all the fun memes that are coming out of this like horrifying story that is basically yet another demonstration of the banality of evil. The evil that you experience in your everyday as an American citizen in a system that is completely corrupt and does not have your best interest at heart. What even makes this unconstitutional? I don't think anything makes this unconstitutional. It's very much within the boundaries and power of the United States president. Okay, this is anyone that tells you that this is like unacceptable or like we gotta fucking defer to the Supreme Court on this is fucking ridiculous. They are lying to you. Okay, they have been duped. At least some of the other people are like, well, this is unfair that it's happening to begin with. Like, those guys are fucking assholes, but at least they're not like, I don't know, completely in the wrong. They're still wrong. They have the wrong opinion, but they're not like wrong about the law, at least. You know what I mean? As long as they don't say that it is illegal for the president to do this. Because it is perfectly legal for the president to do this.
Decision. The HEROES Act provides no authorization for the Secretary's plan when examined using the ordinary tools of statutory interpretation, let alone clear congressional authorization for such a program, meaning the court said Congress never intended for any administration to use the HEROES Act to waive all of this, or grant, rather, this loan forgiveness. What is interesting about this, Nate,
dude, what's up with the PPP loan forgiveness? Why the fuck is nobody talking about the PPP loan forgiveness? Oh, no, that's constitutionally apt. That's totally something within the power of Congress. Like, well, you know, why did that happen? Oh, that's right. It's because that was for, you know, small businesses and mega corporations for the most part. So that was okay. That was like the upper middle class to like wealthy Americans that benefited from that. So fuck you to the student workers. You do not get even a little bit of financial restitution, which you shouldn't even need to begin with, because there should be no debt incurred to get educated, okay? It is fucking insane. It is so stupid. The idea that you need to be saddled with debt to become a more productive laborer when alternatives exist, where other countries that are also developed nations, not only in most instances pay for the college education, but sometimes pay you to go to college, it blows my fucking mind. Oh, here's the other one, by the way. There was no standing. There was no fucking standing for the actual Arkansas and what was it, Wisconsin companies that brought this up the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. Like, they weren't even fucking financially impacted by this. There are two situations where in two major decisions today, the Supreme Court ruled on issues where there was no standing to begin with. Missouri. Oh, not Wisconsin. Missouri. Absolutely unimaginably cruel for no particular reason other than the financial interests of those that engage in debt refinancing, like SoFi, people that actually spend a lot of money to make sure that the Supreme Court justices are put in positions of power, positions of prominence, to, you know, to dish out decisions like the ones that they just did and lobby the government, both the Democrats and the Republicans, right? The company had another email that said they actually would be more damaged if the forgiveness was struck down because a lot of people won't pay and that cost them money to try to track them down, and it's a loss. It was literally Republican politicians acting at the behest of corporations that did not necessarily ask for it in this circumstance. It still certainly helps corporations, especially big ones like SoFi, but like they literally moved on their own pretty much.
Is that this is an intent. No one has currently received any debt loan forgiveness. So the 37 million Americans who would benefit from this took out loans or received Pell Grants with the expectation they would have to repay them. That expectation that will now be realized yet again. There will be no forgiveness of this debt, even though the Biden administration argued strenuously before the court it had the right under the HEROES Act to do so. Reading that law specifically, and the court said directly, it said it found no authorization for a debt forgiveness of this side. The financial implications of it, Nate, $400 billion, the estimated cost of this debt loan forgiveness, and about 16 million Americans would have qualified almost immediately to have their debt forgiven, at least in part or total. That will not happen, and the court has so ruled. Nate, back to you.
Major Garrett, we'll check back in with you on another Supreme Court ruling in just a bit. Thank you. Joining us now, CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Did any of the plaintiffs have the legal standing to bring this suit? In one case, the plaintiffs were 6 GOP-led states. In another, the plaintiffs were 2 student loan borrowers.
Yes, and that's how we got to the opinion that Major just described. If nobody had standing, then the student loan forgiveness program would have remained because nobody would have been able to challenge it. What the court said today is at least Missouri, through a public corporation named Mohila that it created to oversee the student loans, at least Missouri had standing. The court said, we don't have to look at the other states, and they proceeded to look at the merits. Exactly as Major said, they're looking at this 2003 statute, the HEROES Act, and they're looking at 2 very specific words, waiver and modification, and they're trying to figure out if this big student loan forgiveness program falls within either one of those words. And the court said today in a 6-3 decision by the chief, no, this is a big program. You need specific authorization from Congress. You can't try and shoehorn it into waiver or modification in the HEROES Act.
Biden's live on the SCOTUS decision. Let's go to Biden right now.
It was a worthy program, but let's be clear. Some of the same elected Republicans, members of Congress who strongly oppose giving release to students.
Let's see what he's going to do about this.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars themselves in relief, members of Congress, because of the businesses they were able to keep open. Several members of Congress got over $1 million. All those loans were forgiven. You know how much that program cost? $760 billion. My program's too expensive. $360 billion more than I proposed in my student debt relief program. I was trying to provide students with $10,000 to $20,000 in relief. By comparison, the average amount forgiven in the PPP, the pandemic loan program, average amount forgiven was $70,000. Now a kid making $60,000 trying to pay back his bills, asking for $10,000 in relief? Come on. The hypocrisy is stunning. You can't help a family making 75 grand a year, but you can help a millionaire and you have your debt forgiven? My plan would not only have been life-changing for millions of Americans, it would have been good for the American economy. Freeing millions of Americans from the crushing burden of student debt. More homes would have been bought, more businesses would have been started, more couples would have had the confidence to start a family. Millions of people would have felt they could get on with their lives. These Republicans blocked all that. Now, in addition to the hypocrisy, some of these Republicans in Congress are shamelessly pushing to advance a bill in the coming weeks that gives hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks and handouts to the wealthiest Americans. They still haven't given up on making permanent a $2 trillion tax cut that they never paid for. Never paid for. $2 trillion. So let me be clear. For Republicans in Congress, it's not about reducing the deficit. It's not about fairness in forgiving loans. It's only about forgiving loans they have to pay. Today, the Supreme Court sided with them. I believe the court's decision to strike down my student debt relief program was a mistake, was wrong. I'm not going to stop fighting to deliver borrowers what they need, particularly those at the bottom end of the economic scale. So we need to find a new way, and we're moving as fast as we can. First, I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible. We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act. That will allow Secretary Cardona, who's with me today, to compromise, waive, or release loans under certain circumstances. This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. I've directed my team to move as quickly as possible under the law. Just moments ago, Secretary Cardona took the first step to initiate that new approach. We're not going to waste any time on this. We're getting moving on it. It's going to take longer, but we're getting at it right away. Second, we know what many borrowers will need to make their hard choices, which their budgets are being strained now when they start to repay their monthly loan payments this fall. You know, we know that figuring out how to pay these added expenses can take time for borrowers, and they might miss payments at the front end as they get back into repayment. Normally, this could lead borrowers to fall into delinquency and default. But without their it will hurt their financial security, and that's not good for them or the economy. That's why we're creating a temporary 12-month, what we're calling on-ramp repayment program. And now, this is not the same as a student loan pause. It's been in effect for the past 3 years. Monthly payments will be due. Bills will not go out, and interest will be accruing. And during this period, if you can pay your monthly bills, you should. But if you cannot, if you miss payments, this on-ramp will temporarily remove the threat of default or having your credit harmed, which can hurt borrowers for years to come. Because the Department of Education won't refer borrowers. And the reason why that will work, they won't refer borrowers who miss payments to credit agencies for 12 months to give them a chance to get back up and running. Let me close with this. Our Republican officials say student loan relief is a giveaway to the privileged. You hear that loud now, the privileged. I love their concern for the privileged. But I know who student loan borrowers are in this country. So do all you. The couple putting off having a child until they can find their way to deal with their debt. That's who they are. They're young putting off buying their first home so they can get out from under student loans. Hope on the horizon, thanks to relief that I planned last year. Today's court decision snatches it away from them. I get it. I get it. I hear this. And I'm concerned about it. But today's decision has closed one path. Now we're going to pursue another. I'm never going to stop fighting for you. We'll use every tool at our disposal to get you the student debt relief you need and reach your dreams. It's good for the economy. It's good for the country. It's going to be good for you. Thank you very, very much for listening. We're going to get this done, God willing. Thank you.
Mr. President, why did you give millions of borrowers false hope? You've doubted your own authority here in the past.
I didn't give any false hope. The question was whether or not I would do even more than was requested. What I did, I thought was appropriate and was able to be done and would get done. I didn't give borrowers false hope, but the Republicans snatched away the hope that they were given, and it's real hope. Thank you.
Mr. President, will you cancel student debt?
Your authority. Did you overstep your authority?
I think the court misinterpreted the Constitution.
Mr. President, do you admit failure in Afghanistan? Mistakes. There was a report on Afghanistan withdrawal saying there was failure, mistakes. Do you admit
What the fuck?
was mistakes during the withdrawal and before?
No, all the evidence is coming back.
All right, we'll go to CNN to see what they're saying about this after, to hear what the mouthpieces are saying.
I get it.
What the fuck? I don't give a shit about the Afghanistan thing.
And I'm concerned about it. But today's decision has closed one path. Now we're going to pursue another. I'm never going to stop fighting for you. We'll use every tool at our disposal.
Motherfucker got stun locked like he's me.
And reach your dreams. It's good for the economy. It's good for the country. It's going to be good for you. Thank you very, very much for listening. We're going to get this done, God willing. Thank you.
Mr. President, why did you give millions of borrowers false hope? You've doubted your own authority here in the past.
I didn't give any false hope. The question was whether or not I would do even more than was requested. What I did, I thought was appropriate and was able to be done and would get done. I didn't give borrowers false hope, but the Republicans snatched away the hope that they were given, and it's real hope. Thank you.
Mr. President, will you cancel
You
student
overstep
debt?
your authority. Did you overstep your authority?
I think the court misinterpreted the Constitution.
Mr. President, do you admit failure in Afghanistan? Mistakes. There was a report on Afghanistan withdrawal saying there was failure, mistakes. Do you admit there was mistakes during the withdrawal and before?
No, all the evidence coming back there. Remember what I said about Afghanistan? I said Al-Qaeda would not be there. I said it wouldn't be there. I said we'd get help from the Taliban. What's happening now? What's going on? Read your press. I was right. Thanks.
Bro, he's like
report is from the State Department.
gray name reporter. He got stonlocked. He came back for more. I think he's on that good crank. But let's see what the CNN people have to say about it.
Student loan debt forgiveness that was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court today. Let's go straight to Jeremy Diamond, who's over at the White House for us. So, Jeremy, the purpose for President Biden coming out this afternoon was to show the way forward on student loans now that this has happened. What was your big takeaway?
Yeah, I think the headline here is that the president is not giving up on student loan forgiveness, and he is saying at the end of his remarks, he said, one path closed, and now we are pursuing another one. And that other path, the president says, is based on the Higher Education Act of 1965. He says that this is a process that will take longer, but one that the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, has now initiated today to try and release loans, the president said, under certain circumstances. It's not clear exactly what that mechanism is or what those circumstances will be, but the president's message here is to say that we are going to try and find another way to forgive student debt and make good, of course, Abby, crucially, on a key campaign promise that he made in 2020. Now, the president opened his remarks by talking about the anger and disappointment that many Americans are feeling today. 26 million Americans had applied for this program. The president said that as many as 40 million Americans would have been eligible to benefit from some of this student debt relief. And the president's primary purpose here, beyond laying out how he would act, was to try and harness some of that anger and disappointment and direct it at Republicans. You heard the president say there that he was trying to extend a lifeline to many Americans, something that would have not only benefited the financial situation of individual Americans, but stimulated the economy by freeing millions of Americans from some of that student debt burden and allow them to go out and buy homes, for example, and stimulate and grow the economy. And the president here is saying that it was Republicans, he said, Republicans who, quote, stepped in and snatched from the hands of Americans billions of dollars in student debt relief. And so there is obviously a political strategy at work here as well, Abby, as you know, because the president made this essential campaign promise. He tried to make good on it. But you also heard that question at the end. Did you give Americans false hope by pursuing this action under an authority that the Supreme Court has now ruled that the president did not have? The president there very firmly saying, I didn't give any false hope. And he said it was Republicans who snatched away very real hope that he was trying to give the public.
What is this? I may be stupid, but why should a student be forgiven for student loans? Like, you knew what you were getting into, so why you should get off paying it back? Now, I get the interest is a big problem, but at least pay back what you borrowed. I think ultimately the way what I believe in this situation is that college should be free. And the idea that like you have to take a loan out to go to college is already a ridiculous one. So any kind of effort that eases even a margin of that burden on the population that went to college is a good one. I am someone who not only paid his own student loans because I was very fortunate, but paid off my brother's student loans as well. And obviously not many are as fortunate. So I look at that situation and I go, it's great that the government is actually taking action on this. It should not even exist to begin with. This student loan debt relief should not have to exist because student loan debt relief should not even be a thing. Student loans should not be a thing because college education should be either tremendously affordable or just completely free like it is in many other countries, right? It's that simple. It's not more complicated than that because this is not a loan that people are taking on to buy a car, which, by the way, in many instances would be subsidized by the government in the form of not even needing a fucking car because you would have adequate public transit as a completely viable alternative, right? But in America, everything is so decentralized and left up to the individual because this hyper-libertarian, hyper-individualist, American exceptionalist mentality has rotted everyone to the fucking core that they think like, oh no, like everything's up to me. I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to do everything on my own. Meanwhile, the real reason why such mentality exists in America is so that massive corporations can continue benefiting from shafting you. Because they are the ones who provide the alternative, and they're the ones who usually can get away with, they can get away with getting you to pay for it because you have no other alternative. I have not talked about the French riots yet. Please stop asking me about the French riots right now. This is the most important news story of the day. I have just started covering the news. I will get to the French riots inevitably, but before I get to the French riots, I have to talk about the student loan, debt relief, and the other decisions that came down in the past 2 days. Okay? You knew what you were getting yourself into, brother. Get a job with even a slight living wage. You have to have college degree unless you're like skilled in a trade, which obviously is not realistic for the majority of the U.S. population. It's required. What choice do we have? Fuck yourself. I mean, I can get away with not being as aggro in this situation, but the reality is that even countries, developing nations that do not have as much wealth and have the finances can offer a free alternative in the form of higher education, a public institution that you can go to. Okay? In some countries, they quite literally pay you to go to college because college is a good thing. Okay? No matter how much people say, oh, it's stupid, it's dumb, whatever, why are you fucking going? It's like, or no matter how many people talk about like how silly it is to get like ridiculous degrees or whatever. Ultimately, college is a good thing. It's a good experience to have. You learn more critical thinking skills. You learn a lot in college. Even if you're not paying that much attention, you still learn a bunch of things in college. You get to be in a diverse environment, a walkable city, enjoy some level of adequate public transit. You know, these are all things that you get to experience in college. Okay, it's a good thing. I never got a degree, but went for a year and I have a corporate job that requires a degree. There's always a way. I know, but what you're describing is like an alternative, right? Which you don't need to if there is actually free college, right? You don't need to like engage in this kind of thing, or you can if you want to, but ultimately people should have the option. That's my mentality. Okay? Is college the same as university for you? Yes, college is university. That's what we're talking about. University, higher education, a bachelor's degree or higher. So it's you'll in the upcoming days you're going to hear a lot about this decision and why it was a good thing and how it's unfair to do this loan debt relief to begin with. And it's bullshit. The argument that has stood the test of time still applies here. If you had to get chemotherapy and that's the only way you could get through cancer treatment, okay? If there was a better alternative to chemotherapy and it was invented, you would never turn around and go, no, everyone should go through chemotherapy. Because I went through chemotherapy, and that was really fucking unfair for other people to go through, to skirt along without any sort of chemo and the pain that comes along with it to get rid of the cancer in their bodies. If someone were to make that argument, you would consider that to be absolutely fucking insane. Now, I agree it should be affordable, but you should still pay it back because of the choice made by a person going to college, or there should be an alternative to a higher education for people who want to go but are less fortunate and can't afford it. You are quite literally describing the alternative to the higher education, people that want to get that, which, by the way, education is the most important form of upward social mobility, most important ladder for upward social mobility, for the record. But you are describing the alternative and still going, but I still think people should pay it back. It does not matter. There is no fairness conversation here. If some harm was done to you, are you a good person or a bad person? Let's say harm was done to you. Okay? And now there's a way to avoid that harm. For others, would you say, well, harm was done to me, other people should go through it as well? No, right? I don't think you would agree with that. So explain your position from that perspective. Hopefully you can develop a newfound one. My anecdotal outlier has provided me with a barely survivable living situation, so why should anyone be provided with an alternative? Yeah. Ask chatters if they want to live in a country full of morons or not. That's why we need a free education. I think a lot of chatters would rather live in a country that resembles their own fucking idiocy. So those are the ones who are chirping right now. If you went to public institutions, should you pay back your kindergarten all the way to 12th grade? Because private alternatives to that exist. Tomorrow, it could be privatized. The government currently at least offers some level of income and some level of funds to the public institutions so you can get a K through 12 education. Should you start paying back that too? Is that what libertarians are going to do? You do, through taxes. Yeah, you'd be maybe your perspective would shift a little bit if you realize that you also pay for public institutions of higher learning as well in your taxes and get pretty much nothing in return, for the record. Great. I agree. You and I both agree. We already pay for it, and we pay a fuckload more in taxes that goes God knows where, most of the time to the military-industrial complex. Maybe you should go to the colleges. You just described a pivotal part of Bernie Sanders' 2016 and 2020 platform for free college. The irony also is that you already have been paying your taxes, and the federal government absolutely has the opportunity to abolish this debt. If we're going to talk about the constitutional viability or whether or not the president has this power to begin with, the answer is yes. The president does have this power. Okay? That's the other side of the story. The president absolutely has the power to abolish student loan debt. It's literally debt that the government technically paid for already. Okay? Department of Education, which is controlled by the president, has the capacity to forgive all matter of debt. It's already been paid for. Don't say no as the Secretary of Education. Who appointed the Secretary of Education? What are you talking about? It's still the president that has final say on the matter if he wants to, if he has enough energy. It is perfectly constitutional, and anyone who says that it's not constitutional is out of their minds. They're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. I really, really, really love watching American brain dummies make any argument for why free education is a bad thing. Same guys who quote tweet other dog brains like Elijah Schaffer when he posts some video from China with a guy making soup very fast and saying something like, "We are falling behind as a nation." Yeah. Yeah, we should go to college to learn how to make soup very fast. So, before we continue with the CNN panelists, let's get to our friend of the show, David Dayen, describe the student loan forgiveness plan that was ended.
End today's show.
And why it was a ridiculous court case to begin with.
The Supreme Court is issuing today to decide the fate of President Biden's student debt relief plan. We're joined by David Dayen, executive director, executive editor of the American Prospect, where he has a piece headlined "The Student Loan Case's Unwilling Participant." David, coming out of what we just heard with Melissa around the fake gay marriage website, talk about what you found in this other Supreme Court case.
Yeah, it's a remarkable amount of similarity here, really. So in the student loan case, the key issue is standing. Is someone injured by the fact that people are getting this debt relief from the government on their student loans? And the state of Missouri, along with several other states, brought this lawsuit, and they claim that because there's a thing called the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, which is a servicer, they do the day-to-day operations on the loans, that because they will be harmed, allegedly, actually they won't be harmed, but because they will allegedly be harmed by losing a number of student loans to service, then because they owe the state of Missouri money, they might not be able to pay it back. And there are just enormous amounts of reasons why this is problematic. First of all, the loan fund that allegedly the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority won't be able to pay back to the state of Missouri, they haven't made a payment on it in the last 15 years. And internal documents show that they have no intention of paying into this fund. The second thing is internal emails have shown that the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority had nothing to do with this case, didn't file it, didn't solicit it.
Here it is. Internal emails from Mohala show that even Mohala says a lawsuit in front of SCOTUS to kill student debt cancellation should be dismissed for lack of standing, and that Mohala isn't harmed by this cancellation. Here are the internal emails. I saw that already yesterday. Mohala isn't technically a part of the lawsuit. The Missouri Attorney General is suing on their behalf. However, it's all about the FFEL stuff, and since they changed the rules, that lawsuit should be ruled as lacking standing. For those of you who don't know what this means, it means that there's no genuine harm in the situation, okay? Because normally, for you to be able to sue someone, you have to prove that this person is harming you in some way, okay? In a financial way, emotional way, whatever, right? No harm, no foul. Technically, the institutions that are being brought up in this regard are being used as a political pawn by Republican appointed freaks. No, I think Mohala was opposed to this move, but couldn't do anything about it. The Missouri State Attorney General needed to claim that our borrowers were harmed for standing, so they're making us look bad by filing this, not only with Missouri on it, but especially bad because they filed it in MO. There was another one out of Arkansas as well. Okay, there was another one out of Arkansas on top of this. But the reality here is that there was no real fucking harm being done to anybody, and they still went along with it for political purposes, for political reason, to take out a campaign promise that Biden had made, that he had every right to do so, that he could have easily followed on. Are you going to cover how they used Nancy Pelosi to prove the case against Biden? There is no proof against Biden, for the record. There is no proof against Biden in this situation. Nancy Pelosi, who is backed by big donors that also are in debt refinancing, in the debt refinancing business, doesn't prove anything. That just proves that she's a fucking awful demon, okay? Which we all knew. There's no proof there. They did do that, though. It doesn't matter, but it's not proof of anything, guys. It just means that she's a fucking demon. Who cares about her big donors? That's it. Yeah. Anyway, we're not going to get into the fucking Missouri Attorney General and his own, personal experiences. Let's keep talking about the situation.
Didn't know it was happening and didn't know they were being used as a substitute for standing for the state of Missouri until they read about it in news reports. And there are internal emails between employees of Mohala saying, we were opposed to this move, but we couldn't do anything about it. The Missouri State Attorney General needed to claim that our borrowers were harmed so that they could have standing in the case. So, a real similarity of we talk about the Supreme Court's corruption in terms of, going on junkets and things like this. But maybe a deeper corruption is the fact that they seem to not check the basic facts in these various cases, and they're ruling on things that aren't legitimate in some way.
How are these not being fact checked?
It really
talk about how you found it. Talk about how you found it.
It was through state sunshine laws. The Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority.
It's called Mohala.
Mohala is sort of a state instrumentality, and they, in fact, the only way that the state of Missouri could get information from Mohala is that they had to use state sunshine laws to extract that information. And so advocates at the Student Borrower Protection Center did the same thing, looking up whether they were talking about this case. and they found this tranche of emails that shows that they had nothing to do about it. And in one case, one employee asks, are we involved in this case? Are we the bad guys? Is the direct quote that the Mahela employee makes. So yeah, I mean, it's a situation where by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, they sort of assume facts, as Melissa said, they assume the facts as legitimate. But in this case, if the court in fact rules to deny 43 million borrowers reductions in their loan balances, they'll be doing it based on a standing argument on behalf of a plaintiff that was a complete unwilling participant in this case.
And if the court does rule that way, can President Biden still cancel student debt?
A lot of advocacy groups say that the president could use other means. Right now, they are using the authority granted under something called the HEROES Act, which allows them in the cases of emergency like the pandemic to ensure that borrowers aren't made worse by that situation. They could also use the 1965 Higher Education Act and its compromise and settlement authority to reduce loan balances. It certainly remains to be seen if the Supreme Court sort of slaps down the president, whether he would be willing to use another authority to try to do it in a different way.
David Dayen, before we end the show, I want to ask you about another SCOTUS point. And for people who are not familiar, SCOTUS is Supreme Court of the United States. As we reported today in headlines, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito leased land to a fossil fuel company for oil and gas exploration around the same time the firm stood to benefit from a major environmental case before the High Court. The Intercept has just reported that Justice Alito did not recuse himself from the case, even though his family stood to profit from the outcome. And he ended up writing the 5-4 majority opinion in Sackett versus Environmental Protection Agency, which gutted protections for U.S. wetlands under the Clean Water Act. At the time, his wife, Martha Ann Baumgardner Alito, had an agreement with the firm Citizens Energy to earn revenue from any oil and gas produced on her land in Oklahoma, which she inherited from her father. And of course, this following the bombshell report in ProPublica that found that Justice Alito took this undisclosed luxury fishing vacation with Republican megadonor Paul Singer in 2008, then later ruled in Singer's favor in several cases. Singer, a major donor to the Manhattan Institute, the Republican think tank that supports blocking student debt relief. Members of the Debt Collective demanding Alito recuse himself from today's Supreme Court ruling on President Biden's plan to give 40 million student borrowers up to $20,000 each in debt relief. Your response to these latest revelations, which, of course, follow the revelations around Clarence Thomas and his relationship with the billionaire donor Harlan Crow?
Well, I mean, the fact is that the Supreme Court is really a rogue institution.
I know they put Nancy Pelosi in here, chat. I know. It doesn't matter. It's not proof of anything. As then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi explained, this is on the opinion, people think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress in a press conference, said the office of the Speaker of the House. Okay? Yes. That is the nerdiest way to just like own the Biden administration. Okay? If Nancy Pelosi said this, well, I guess we can't fucking do it then. I guess it has to be true. It's not true. There are numerous different ways that Biden could eradicate this student loan debt, okay, that has been incurred by the Department of Education. And we shit on Nancy Pelosi back then. Let's continue. Where the fuck were we?
It's an example of self-regulation. Justices decide on their own whether or not to recuse. The documents that they file, while journalists can scrutinize those documents and maybe find other cases where they didn't disclose certain gifts or other personal financial windfalls. There's basically no sanction for it. These are lifetime appointments. I mean, this is what arrogance looks like in manifested form. And there's nothing much that the public can do about it except bring pressure to bear. And I think that some of the rulings that we've seen this year, which have been a little more moderate, could be a result of the legitimacy crisis sort of at the heart of the Supreme Court. And it's good that journalists and other people are paying more attention to this circumstance, but it's really frustrating.
Well, of course, we'll continue to follow all of these issues. David Dayen, executive editor of The American Prospect. His piece will link to the student.
Yeah, let's talk about what David has written, because he's written extensively on the subject. So after today's words, because Biden came out and spoke about what this new program and new cancellation methods were going to look like. So here's what he had to say. So according to the president's words, they're going to create a new program, I presume, with the same parameters under the Compromise and Settlement Authority of the Higher Education Act that we discussed as the main way to cancel student loan debt years ago. Because there are still ways to cancel this this student loan debt. He mentioned that it will take longer. I think this is what that means. There are a couple of regulatory hurdles. They are discussed in this letter. There's something called the Federal Claims Collection Standards that requires a rulemaking if an agency wants to cancel debt owed to the government. There are federal standards that govern this authority. Congress granted Education Secretary its own authority under the HEA, and these Harvard lawyers think it controls. But others have been wary of that interpretation. A 2016 amendment to these rules does reference the FCCS. In addition, late in George W. Bush's term, a regulation modified the Secretary of Education's authority to compromise or settle a debt, giving the Department of Justice a review and comment period on any proposed resolution of a claim that's over $1 million. At the very least, that review process would have to happen. At the most, the Secretary would have to go through the FCCS process. Either way, that would take time. That's why clearing this regulatory underbrush should have been done in January 20 or 2021, not 3 years in. Now, of course, the SCOTUS could then try and turn around and knock this down because they also said that Title 4 of the Higher Education Act of 1965 governs federal financial aid mechanisms, including student loans. The act authorizes the Secretary of Education to cancel or reduce loans in certain limited circumstances. The Secretary may cancel a set amount of loans held by some public servants. He may also forgive the loans of borrowers who have died or become permanently and totally disabled, borrowers who are bankrupt, and borrowers whose schools falsely certify them, close down, or fail to pay their lenders. The issue presented in this case is whether the Secretary has authority under the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students, the HEROES Act of 2003, to depart from the existing provisions of the Education Act and establish a student loan forgiveness program that will cancel about $430 billion in debt, principal, and affect nearly all borrowers. Under the HEROES Act, the Secretary may waive or modify any statutory regulatory provision applicable to the Student Financial Assistance Program under Title IV, as the Secretary deems necessary in connection with a war or other military operation or national emergency. Okay? For those of you who are saying, why didn't Biden do this earlier? It's because it wasn't so close to the midterms. Okay? That's why. They like to trickle some of the more popular and easily doable forms of some of the easily doable campaign promises later in the race, so that the midterms pass already. I'm talking about why they didn't do it immediately when they had the majority as well. So they had like some kind of additional support from Congress that you could maybe tack on to a budget reconciliation or something. Okay? Which, by the way, who knows if they could have done that, because obviously there are plenty of spoilers within the party, and that was their goal. Their goal was to literally destroy Biden's agenda, which Biden himself is not all too keen on advancing. Can anyone get rid of these corrupt justices? No. As you have seen, ProPublica has done endless amounts of coverage on how corrupt the institution is and how corrupt these individual justices are over and over again. Every other week, there's like a new article that comes out where it's like a billionaire literally sucked the penis of Chief Justice. And then, you know, they brought a case that directly related to the billionaire to the Supreme Court, and it's totally fine. And then they come out and they're like, well, I didn't know I couldn't get my dick sucked off by a billionaire. Sorry, I thought this was America. And then it's fine. Okay? So there's not really much you can do. I guess you can expand the Supreme Court, but obviously Joseph Robinette Biden is not interested in that, and I have to go back and refresh my knowledge on how to legally be able to do that. But ultimately, it is it seems hopeless. Okay, that's it. It's just I don't know what else to say. Because I don't think Biden is interested in making these changes. I mean, there might be some way to overcome these institutional hurdles. There's always a way to overcome institutional hurdles. You could just like do whatever you fucking want to do. But there's not really much you can do without serious organizing, without an actual worker-backed backbone. Okay, very difficult to make any kind of momentum stick. And if you're thinking like, oh, burn this shit down, one, you do not have the organizational capacity. Two, you do not have any genuine momentum behind it. And three, look to what happened in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter protests, in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's execution. There were continued protests for almost a fucking year. Okay? It was a perfect moment. Because it came at the heels of like being locked inside for an extended period of time. People wanted to spill out as best as they could, and yet no such systemic institutional changes came as a consequence of that. So even when you like quote unquote burn shit down, it still doesn't matter, because the only way you can genuinely enact change is if you have leverage. Okay? Revolt, unfortunately, is not leverage. Leverage only comes when you can strike at the core of capital. How do you strike at the core of capital? Through continued state protests, through strikes, through labor action. And as it stands, we do not have enough organizational momentum. Just so fucking stupid. Here, let's take a look at More Perfect Union's short video on the matter.
It happened. The Supreme Court just killed your student debt relief. But don't let anyone tell you this is the end of the story. The Biden administration still has the legal authority to cancel student debt because Congress already authorized it. Let me explain. President Biden's first attempt to cancel student debt, the one the Supreme Court just struck down, was based on a law called the HEROES Act of
They had JFK in the 60s. We had Trump during George Floyd. That's interesting. Who came after George Floyd? Oh, yeah, that's right. Joseph Robinette Biden. What kind of changes were made to policing in this country when Biden became president? What did the Democrats want to do as far as change to begin with? Oh, surely they didn't just run on the same fucking crime wave narrative all over the goddamn nation, right? I mean, certainly not, right? Oh, yeah, that's right. That is what they ran on. More funding to cops. Crime wave is out of control. We need to suck and fuck our police force. We need to get down on our knees and fucking demand that they do their job and beg them to do their job. And that those who are hurting the feelings of the police force in this country are actually the evil ones that are responsible for this supposed crime wave happening everywhere.
Of 2003. This law gave the Education Department the power to waive or modify student loans for people affected by a national emergency. The Biden administration claimed the COVID pandemic was a national emergency, but the Supreme Court abused its power and rejected the president's argument. Thankfully, there is another law under which Biden can legally cancel student debt. We talked to Persis Yu, a lawyer at the Student Borrower Protection Center, to explain the legal mechanisms Biden can still utilize.
The administration's hands are absolutely not tied in this circumstance. There are many tools that the secretary can use. In particular, the secretary already has the authority, and the president can direct the secretary to use the authority to cancel student loans under the Higher Education Act, under the provisions which allow them to settle, compromise, modify, and waiver any of the debts in their portfolio. This is a tool that the Department of Education regularly uses in the maintenance of its portfolio. In fact, we've seen instances where, for example, Secretary Betsy DeVos canceled certain borrowers some amounts of student loan debt during the last administration. The president can direct the secretary to take these actions to ensure that student loan borrowers are still given the debt relief that they desperately need right now.
The nation today has a $1.78 trillion student debt burden.
Like, this should not exist. You understand? It should not. Why does this exist? There should be price controls set on institutions of higher learning, okay? Because they are out of control. This is a reality that Republicans only acknowledge as a way to deflect away from the student loan debt relief, as a way to attack the student loan debt relief, to say, oh, this doesn't tackle the problem. No, this tackles one of the consequences of the problem. The problem still persists. You need to also deal with the issue. But it's completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous that we are expected to subsidize our own labor force becoming more productive, okay? There's a reason why every other goddamn country has made this fucking free, or they literally pay you to get this educational training. It's so insane. The notion that we have to pay out of pocket for this is absolutely insane.
Burden owed to the federal government by about 45 million Americans. That's about 1 in 5 U.S. adults. It's no surprise that this far-right, corrupt Supreme Court has decided to strike down relief, deciding in favor of a plaintiff that doesn't have standing, a harm that never happened, and false claims that were never checked. This base.
I feel like, I feel like so many people don't understand what you said earlier. This debt is already paid for. The government isn't giving money they don't have. They quite literally use it as a way to make money. Exactly. Like, this is not, it's not coming out of your pockets. When so many people lied about it and they were like, well, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? It's like, dude, you already paid for it. Okay? You already paid for it. You paid for it. Taxes paid for it. It's already funded. It doesn't matter. Debt that the government, that you took from the government, okay? Which is precisely the reason why Biden can just erase it. The education secretary could just tomorrow say, all right, no more debt. Fuck it, YOLO.
Baseless decision creates disastrous new legal precedents while striking down a completely legal policy that millions of people have planned their futures around.
Free college for everyone is incompatible with everyone being able to go to college. In lots of countries with fewer basically free college education, a college education is a limited resource only available to those who meet higher requirements than the average American student who is able to attend college from a German. Yeah, you're not right about that at all. You're not even remotely correct. What are you saying? The education paradox. One needs higher education to climb the ranks in a capitalistic structure. However, one needs capital to get education in the first place. It makes no sense. If we believe that education leads to higher incomes and social mobility, putting a hurdle on it makes no sense. Yeah, except it does make sense. It makes sense from only one perspective. And that is the perspective of the capital owning class, especially when you consider their short-term gains. Let me explain. College being expensive benefits those institutions. They make more money. That's great for them. But it also benefits capital owners and business owners, because now when you have upward social mobility, you actually, or when you're supposedly, theoretically, a bachelor degree student, you should have upward social mobility, but don't. Don't actually have that. You want to know why? Because you're saddled with a shitload of debt. And when you have a shitload of debt, you take on whatever job you can, or even jobs that you want to, you'll take on without a second thought about whether or not it pays you adequately. Because you have to immediately start paying those debts. And even when you do that, even when you get a job, you have to maintain that job for not one, but two reasons now. One, because that job is the only way that you have health care, right? You have insurance, employment-based insurance in this country. So you can't really decide to leave your job because then you're kicked out of coverage, and that's fucking terrifying. And also on top of that, you have loans to pay off. That's it. That's what this system, that's who the system benefits. Law tip, when a Republican president talks about cutting taxes, do we ever hear from motherfuckers who paid taxes in the past saying that it's not fair to people who already paid those taxes? Well, no, because those people are paying less taxes now in the future, and they like that. And if people were not in debt, they would want more from their laws in society. The excuse that there used to be you need more education would be gone. Student loan debt took me down an entirely different career path than what my 4-year degree was for because I needed to pay them back, and jobs in my field were not readily available. Yes. That is the goal. It is the design. That is by design, okay? That's the intent behind these kinds of actions that make no sense in the long term because you're like, well, in the long term, it seems like you're putting financial hurdles upon having a better educated populace, having a better educated workforce, having a more productive labor force. Isn't that bad? Well, not that bad from the short-term perspective. Even SCOTUS thinks the chirping from individuals is stupid in Department Education v. Brown, which is why they had to jump through hoops with Mohela and Missouri on the Biden v. Nebraska case. Respondents lack Article 3 standing to assert a procedural challenge to the student loan debt forgiveness plan adopted by the Secretary of Education pursuant to Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act, HEROES Act. Yes, we covered this in the beginning. That is just insult to injury. Like, I don't even care about the procedural hurdles that they completely bouldered through, right? Because I don't think process is real. And this basically proves it. And that's why I showed you that there was no standing in this circumstance. And the victim, the quote-unquote victim in this situation, openly admitted in private correspondence that have been revealed since that there was no standing, that there was no harm being done to them, and yet they still took on this case and went forward with it. It's like if your brother borrowed money from you, let's say, okay, and then you were like, all right, you know what? It's fine. I don't really give a shit. Like, I don't need to get the money back. But then some cop was like, no, that's still theft. You're going to fucking jail. You know what I mean? Like, wait a minute. I don't want this. It's fine. It's totally fine. It's like, nah, that's theft, dog. Sorry. Rules are rules. You're going to fucking jail. Obviously, this is very reductive. There are multiple components that I did not mention in this story, in this analogy, but that's how it works. My apologies. Can you look at the last question? Sorry, came across as annoying. Not my intent. My last question. What is this? What exactly is our goal then? Not to sound pessimistic, but it feels like everything we do is useless and has no meaning at this point. No organization or political power. You just chip away at it, my friend. You can't have a defeatist mentality. Just because things are awful, just because things seem hopeless, doesn't change the reality that you shouldn't have revolutionary optimism in your heart. Ultimately, you're doing the right thing. Ultimately, you're working towards a unified goal to better people's lives, and that should give you all of the good feelings that you need to feel in your heart. Okay. Incrementalism, bat chest. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying incrementalism. Vote for the Democrats and shut the fuck up and go to brunch. The reality is, as pessimistic as I am, and, you know, being a fucking leftist, I am very used to taking L's. There's not really much you can do about it when all the cards in the deck are stacked against you. placed there by people with so much institutional power who literally designed the deck of cards to churn out results that favor them. But you can't stop yourself from picking away at the problem. There's not much else you can do. Motherfucker thinks I can afford brunch, lol. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yes, as I always say, society prospers when old men plant trees, the shades of which they will never sit in. Which I paraphrase all the time and quote all the time in the worst ways possible, but that's how it works. And for all the and for the record, for all of the people that say what would the French do in this case? What would the French do in this case? They would burn the streets down. It's like, what have the French done in and they have a much better they have a much longer history of just like violent revolt. What has the French government done in response to the on the ground retaliation? They didn't do shit. They didn't respond to it at all. They just bouldered through. They didn't give a fuck. So what did they get across? They got nothing. So even in France, that shit is no longer hitting in the way that it used to. How do you mentally cope with the fact that you'll never get to enjoy its shade as you bust your ass planting the tree? What? I don't give a fuck. My conscience is clear. I feel good. That's my selfish desire. And it makes me happy to know that I'm working away in a goal that might not immediately be realized, but it doesn't matter. I'm doing the right thing. That's how I feel. What chatters need to learn is they're living in some of the shade planted by old men who did the same thing. We must continue to plant trees for future generations. Yeah, I mean, a great example of this is quite literally what you are enjoying now, right? It's called the weekend. Some of you have the capacity to enjoy it. Some of you don't. But there's a lot of people who do. How do we get there? Well, there was a long and hard battle that was fought.